Hi, my name's Tamsin. I showed up to my parents' 40th anniversary, and they sat me outside. In the rain, no chair at their table, no photo in their slideshow, not even my name on the program. But here's the thing, this wasn't the first time they left me out. Just the first time I noticed they wanted it that way. And when I finally walked away, calm, silent, soaked, they called me hours later, crying. But were they crying because I left? Or because they realized I wasn't coming back? I arrived early, not out of enthusiasm, but habit. I've always been the one who shows up on time, dressed right, saying the right things. That day was no different. Navy blue dress, minimal jewelry, clean makeup. It was my parents' 40th anniversary, and I'd convinced myself I should be there. Be present. Be visible. The venue was beautiful in a rehearsed, magazine spread kind of way. Ornate garden lighting, polished wood accents, white linen tables already kissed with rain. A light drizzle was coming down when I pulled into the lot, and I remember thinking, of course it's raining. The kind of mist that doesn't pour but sticks to your skin like disappointment. I walked up to the check-in table, where a young woman with a name tag smiled too wide. Hi there, name? Tamsin Hathaway, I said, voice clear, confident. I didn't flinch. She paused, scanned the chart in front of her, and I saw the flicker. That slight pause, the tilt of her head. Then came the smile again, stretched tighter. Oh, here you are. Table 8, out on the terrace. I blinked. The terrace? Yes, just out that door and around. Covered seating. Covered. Like a tarp is cover, like a consolation prize is still a win. Inside the main room, I could already see Vera's table, our family seated right in the center. Vera, with her white teeth and curated laugh, holding court like she always did. My parents, Norman and Clarice, at her side. The image was sharp, shiny, and whole. And just like that, I wasn't part of it. I made my way to the terrace, a square space of wet pavers and sagging white fabric overhead. My name card was stuck to the plastic table with condensation, the ink slightly blurred at the edges. My seat was right next to a potted tree. It dropped water on my shoulder twice before I realized it wasn't the rain. It was the venue crying for me. No one else was out there, not even a server. I sat. I told myself I was being mature, that making a scene was beneath me. I watched as guests filed inside, coats off, glasses full. Laughter traveled through the windows and rolled across the lawn like smoke. I adjusted the hem of my dress, smoothed my napkin, waited for someone, anyone, to notice. And then I saw her, Clarice, exiting the main room, likely on her way to the restroom. She caught sight of me, paused only half a second, then walked over with that familiar smile that never reached her eyes. Tamsin, she said, voice feather-light. You're here. I thought you weren't coming. I RSVP'd. Her eyebrows arched just slightly. You should have told us. We didn't know where to put you. I nodded slowly. I wanted to say, but you knew where to put Vera's new in-laws. And that guy who coached Dominic in soccer 20 years ago. You knew where to put everyone but me. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded again. Clarice adjusted her shawl. Well, enjoy. The terrace is lovely this time of year. Then she was gone. I stared after her, the air around me growing heavier with each minute. The drizzle had turned steady now, a low, consistent patter on the canopy. I pulled my chair slightly to the left to avoid the worst of the dripping, but the damage was already done. My hem was damp, my hands cold. Inside, flashes popped from cameras. People leaned in for pictures, shared bites of cake. Vera laughed, loud, bright, perfect. My father raised a glass in a toast I couldn't hear. No one noticed I wasn't there. You know how people say, at least they tried? There's no at least here. They didn't forget. They just didn't bother. I stared at my name card. The calligraphy had started to bleed, black lines curling into each other like ink drowning in itself. The corner curled up from the moisture, shivering against the plastic surface. I pressed it down, and I sat. Because at that moment, I hadn't yet decided what kind of woman I would be when I stood up. The rain didn't stop. It just shifted, from a drizzle to a more deliberate rhythm, like it had somewhere to be and decided I wasn't it. I stepped back under the thin canopy, brushing damp hair from my face, and stared through the glass at the party unfolding inside. From where I stood, the celebration looked perfect. Warm lighting, clinking glasses, hands lifted in toasts, people hugging, laughing, leaning in to whisper memories, as if the decades they spoke of had been good to everyone in that room. I used to think I belonged in those pictures. Now, I wasn't so sure I'd even been in them. As I moved toward the door, a young man in black slacks and a fitted shirt, likely a staff member, caught my eye. He stepped forward politely, stopping me before I could re-enter the ballroom. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, not unkindly. "This section is reserved for family and VIP guests. Do you have the green badge?" I looked at him. Then I looked past him, where Vera stood under a spotlight, surrounded by familiar faces and fake laughter. "I'm the daughter," I said, keeping my voice even. His eyes flicked toward the name list in his hand, then back to me. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I wasn't informed. I'll check." I shook my head gently. "Don't bother." He hesitated, then stepped back, unsure whether to apologize or pretend I never spoke. He chose silence, the most common language spoken around me tonight. I stood by the wall, a little ways from the doors, watching through the glass, like a guest at a museum exhibit titled, "This is what family looks like." I'd seen enough staged perfection to know when something had been rehearsed. That's when the slideshow began. A giant screen descended at the front of the ballroom, and a soft instrumental soundtrack played. Sentimental piano, the kind that always feels like it's leading to a tearful hug. The title screen read, 40 years, 40 blessings. And then the photos began. Vera's graduation. Norman holding up a trophy at a charity golf event. Clarice standing beside her PTA friends. The grandkids blowing out candles. The family dog in a sweater. Family picnics, Christmas mornings, summer lake trips. Faces I recognized. Moments I remembered. Because I was there. Except I wasn't. Slide after slide went by, and I was nowhere. Not a glimpse, not a smile, not even the back of my head in a crowd shot. I scanned the screen with my eyes, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. It wasn't just a mission, it was intentional. Finally, toward the end, a name flashed. And of course, Tansen. Spelled wrong. One image. A blurry snapshot from a birthday in the 90s where I was barely visible behind Vera and a cake shaped like a castle. A former neighbor standing nearby wiped her eyes and said, "They really included everything, didn't they?" I smiled politely and said nothing. Inside, the applause started. Someone raised a glass. Vera beamed as if she'd earned this entire legacy by posing well enough. I pressed my hands against the cold glass. I wasn't angry, not exactly. Anger needs energy. This was more like clarity, like stepping into the light after realizing you've been sitting in a shadow you didn't know was there. I thought of last Christmas, how I sent a card, a small gift, a polite text. No one responded. Not out of malice, but out of habit. I had become forgettable. And maybe that's what stung most. Not being hated, just not factored in. Like I'd slipped through the cracks of their perfect narrative. My breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it away. One mistake is forgettable, I whispered to myself. 2 is forgivable, but 3? That's design. Camera flashes burst again as someone toasted Vera, her name echoing through the hall. I stepped back, letting the wind hit my back instead of my face. The air was colder now, not just because of the weather. It felt colder because I understood something I hadn't let myself admit before. This wasn't about being forgotten. It was about being removed. They built a version of family that didn't include me. And worse, they celebrated it. I stayed near the wall for a while, watching them through the glass like a stranger outside a storefront. Then the cold finally nudged me back indoors. Not for warmth, but to find a restroom, maybe gather myself before deciding what came next. I slipped through a side hallway lined with framed family photos. At first glance, they were harmless, a wall of memories. Until I noticed one in particular. It was a large canvas print of our family vacation to Cannon Beach. I remembered that trip vividly. I'd taken time off work, booked the rental myself when Vera flaked, even brought the extra beach chairs no one thanked me for. I remembered exactly where I stood in that picture, between my father and the cooler, holding a soda can with my sunglasses pushed up into my hair. But in this version, I wasn't there. They'd cropped the frame. Where I'd been, they'd added a floral design element, a swirled overlay with a seashell graphic. Aesthetic, yes. Accurate? Not even close. I stepped closer, narrowing my eyes. My father's elbow was angled awkwardly. There was a gap too wide between Vera and the dog. I pressed my fingers to the glass. No trace, not even a shadow. It wasn't a mistake. It was a rewrite. The hallway was empty, except for an occasional passing guest who barely glanced my way. I moved past the gift table, pretending to look at the centerpiece. That's when I felt a tug on my sleeve. "Are you adopted?" a small voice asked. I turned. Junie, Vera's daughter, 7 years old, smart as a whip, her curls pulled into a ponytail so tight it could have kept secrets. I bent slightly, giving her my full attention. "Why do you ask that?" She bit her lip, suddenly shy. "Mom said, you don't like family stuff, that you don't really fit." I nodded slowly. "And you thought that meant I might not be from the same family?" She shrugged, then smiled like kids do when they don't understand the weight of what they're carrying. "It's okay. I don't fit in at school sometimes either." Then, just like that, she skipped off, probably in search of cake or cousins more fun than me. And I stood there, flattened. That was the moment it shifted. Not the slideshow, not the seating chart. This. Because kids repeat what they hear when no one's pretending. They echo the things whispered behind closed doors. And Junie didn't invent that thought. She was just the delivery system. I backed away from the table, wandered down a corridor past the coat room. I needed space, air, something that wasn't curated or soaked in selective memory. That's when I saw the banner. A printed welcome sign near the entrance, strung with fairy lights. Celebrating 40 years of love, laughter, and legacy with the Hathaway family. Below it, a list of featured memories, quotes from each family member, handwritten in different fonts. Vera's was bold and centered. "Thank you for teaching me how to lead with grace." Norman's, "Through all the noise, Clarice was the melody." Of course, even the in-laws had quotes. So did the grandkids. Mine wasn't there. I wasn't even a footnote. I stared at the banner until my vision blurred, but not from tears. It was that dizzying kind of rage that tightens your throat and makes your limbs feel too hot for your skin. And yet, I didn't rip it down. Didn't scream. Didn't storm into the ballroom with accusations. I simply turned back down the hall, walked past the cropped photo again, and whispered to no one. There's a difference between being overlooked and being erased. That hallway wasn't empty. Not anymore. It was a museum of revision, and I was the missing exhibit. The corridor fed back into the main hallway, where staff members moved quietly with trays and empty glasses. I walked past them, unsure what I was even looking for anymore. Answers. A moment alone? Something to anchor myself to before I unraveled completely? Near the audio-visual booth, just past the staff staging area, I paused. Not out of purpose, but instinct. That's when I heard her. Vera's voice carried clearly, practiced and confident, though she wasn't speaking to me. "Just skip her part," she told the MC. "Trust me, no one will notice." It wasn't whispered. It wasn't hidden. She didn't bother with discretion because she didn't think I was there, or worse, didn't care if I heard. My name was her. My contribution, my presence, reduced to an optional detail in an evening where everything had been meticulously curated. Except me. I didn't say a word, didn't confront. Not yet. I memorized the line, filed it beside the cropped photos and missing name cards. I was building a case, one subtle betrayal at a time. Back in the main reception area, Clarice stood beside a family friend near the dessert table. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on a flute of champagne. I approached, not with confrontation, but with curiosity. I wanted to see how she'd handle me with an audience. The woman she spoke to turned to me with a polite smile. Clarice followed her gaze and hesitated, just for a second. "Oh," she said, her voice overly bright. "This is Tamsin. She doesn't really come around much anymore." It was said with a shrug, like I was an old friend who'd drifted, or a neighbor who no longer watered their lawn regularly. Not a daughter. Not someone who had once made soup when she had the flu, or helped pick out the curtains in the family room. I offered a weak smile. "Nice to meet you," I said to the friend. Then I turned to Clarice, still calm. "I RSVP'd 2 weeks ago." Clarice blinked. "Well, yes, but it's been so long. You've been busy." Busy! The word was a catch-all. It let them off the hook while implying I'd chosen absence. But I hadn't missed holidays. I hadn't skipped birthdays. I had shown up again and again, only to be gently pushed aside each time until I stopped reaching for the doorbell. Before she could pivot the conversation, I leaned in, close enough that only she could hear me. "Don't pretend this is accidental anymore. You made choices." Her face didn't change. She took a sip of her drink, eyes steady. "You're reading too much into things. Just enjoy the night." Then came the real dagger, Vera appearing like clockwork, looping an arm through Clarice's as if to reinforce her claim. She looked me over, lips curled just enough. "Always making drama," she said, tilting her head, "even in heels." I exhaled through my nose, steady, measured. "You don't get to shrink me," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "Then call me sensitive when I push back." Vera raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, come on. No one's shrinking you. You just always make everything about you." "I make it about truth," I replied. "You just don't like how that looks under good lighting." Clarice shifted slightly, clearly ready to de-escalate. But I didn't need to escalate anything. I just needed to say it out loud, to make them hear what they'd taught me to swallow for years. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I added, glancing at the crowd of oblivious guests. "But don't expect me to keep pretending I'm fine being invisible." Neither of them responded. Not right away. Clarice looked back toward the room, her smile already returning for someone else. Vera tapped the glass in her hand like she had better things to toast. And maybe she did. I turned away, not defeated, not ashamed. I'd said what needed to be said. If they chose to ignore it, that wasn't my burden anymore. They could call it drama. I called it drawing a line. After I stepped away from Vera and Clarice, I wandered the edge of the reception, searching for distance without drawing attention. The music had shifted to a slower tempo, some piano-driven ballad that tried to convince the room we were all basking in some golden-hued legacy. I wasn't basking. I was observing, like a guest at my own funeral who just realized she wasn't in the slideshow. I found a quiet stretch near the restrooms and catering hallway where staff darted in and out with trays, unnoticed by the guests, but carrying the weight of the night. I leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, calculating what came next. I didn't want to leave, not yet. There was still something they hadn't taken from me. That's when the video started. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the room like someone had drawn a curtain. A projector screen lowered, and the opening slide read, "To 40 Years of Love, a tribute to Clarice and Norman." My chest tightened. I had spent hours compiling clips, scanning old photos, syncing everything to a song I knew my father loved. I'd sent it to the coordinator last week. As the images played, I saw my work. Every transition, every carefully timed fade. My fingers had arranged those moments, but my name wasn't mentioned. Instead, the MC stepped forward when the video ended and announced cheerfully, A big thank you to Vera for putting together that beautiful tribute. What a gift to the family. My breath caught. Around me, people clapped. Some dabbed their eyes. A distant cousin leaned toward me and whispered, "Vera's always been so thoughtful, hasn't she?" I nodded slowly. Yeah, she sure knows how to make things hers. She didn't catch it. Of course she didn't. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I smiled, just enough to keep the heat in, and I walked toward the back of the room, far from the center of applause. I needed distraction, so I pulled out my phone. That's when the airdrop request popped up. "You've received one photo from Elise's iPhone." I accepted it. The picture was nothing remarkable, just a group shot taken earlier. But what caught my eye wasn't the photo. It was the name of the group chat it came from, House Hathaway Core. Curious, I tapped on the link embedded beneath. It took me to a messaging thread, 53 messages. All from the last week, planning details, cake tasting, seating strategy, playlist options, timeline spreadsheets. No mention of me, not once. Then I saw it. Vera, in one of the earlier messages. "Let's keep this one clean. Don't loop in Tamsin. She always makes it weird." I stared at that sentence for a full minute, like it was written in fire. That wasn't accidental. That was doctrine. A rule they'd all agreed on. I locked my phone and stood still for a beat. Then I moved. Vera was standing near the bar, glass of champagne in one hand, eyes scanning the room like she owned it. I approached her slowly, not to make a scene, but to ensure she'd hear every word. "Vera!" I said, interrupting mid-toast. She turned, surprised, but not startled. "Hey," she said, smile still plastered on. "Everything okay?" "You forgot I'm your sister," I said quietly. "Worse, you forgot I'm still here." Her smile twitched. "You've been gone a long time, Tamsin." "And yet somehow," I said, leaning just slightly closer, "you keep stealing what I create." Her eyes flickered, like she was deciding whether to laugh or lash out. "I didn't steal anything," she said finally. "People just assume. I don't control what they say." "No," I said, "but you control what they see. And you made sure I wasn't in view." She looked down at her glass, then back at me. "This isn't the time for this." "It never is," I said, stepping back. "That's how you've kept me quiet." She didn't follow. She didn't apologize. She just watched me walk away. I moved through the side corridor behind the ballroom, away from the sound of clinking glasses and hollow laughter. The hallway was dim, lit only by soft sconces and the occasional flicker from an emergency exit sign. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and something warm, maybe reheated rolls from the kitchen. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed space, somewhere no one would tell me to smile more or call me sensitive, in a tone too sweet to be sincere. The door to the staff prep area was slightly ajar. Inside, a tray of untouched name cards sat on a counter next to a clipboard. I stepped in, not quite sure what drew me there, until I saw it. My name card. Still there. Unbent, unsmudged, unclaimed. They hadn't lost it, they hadn't forgotten. They just hadn't put it out. I stared at it, the thick cardstock almost mocking in its precision. Tamsin Hathaway, printed in perfect calligraphy. No table number written in. No crease to suggest it had ever been handled. They made room for Vera's dog once. A whole place setting with a water dish under the table and a bone-shaped napkin ring. But me? I got the storage counter. A door creaked behind me. I turned to find Junie standing there, cupcake frosting on her chin and her little gold shoes scuffed from the dance floor. She was still clutching a balloon by the string, the kind that probably matched the family crest Vera had printed on the napkins. "Auntie Tamsin," she said, "Mom said you might leave early." I raised an eyebrow. "She did?" "Yeah. She said you always ruin things." The balloon bobbed behind her as she spoke. "She said you make people uncomfortable. That's why there wasn't a seat. She said you don't really fit anymore." I squatted down to her level, smiling gently. Did she say why? Junie shrugged, her mouth full of frosting now. Because you're always serious. And you don't laugh at Grandpa's jokes. That's true. And you don't let people talk over you. That's also true. She looked confused. Is that bad? I stood. Depends on who you ask. Junie gave a small nod, then wandered off toward the dessert table. I watched her go, that balloon trailing behind like a thought not yet formed. She had no idea she'd just cut deeper than any adult had managed all night. I walked back out to the terrace, the place they stuck me when they didn't know what else to do with me. My clutch was still sitting on the table where I left it. I picked it up, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and for the first time all evening, I walked through the front entrance of the ballroom. Straight down the center aisle, past Vera's admirers, past Clarice holding court, past Norman, seated stiffly like a man permanently stuck in neutral. I walked until I stood at the head table. Vera turned, mid-sentence, glass in hand. Her smile faltered when she saw me. I didn't say a word. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the pristine name card, and placed it neatly on the linen tablecloth, right in front of her plate. I made sure she saw the name. Then I turned, slow and deliberate, and walked back the way I came. Not rushing, not hiding, just leaving, with my dignity intact and my silence louder than any speech I could have given. As I passed Norman, I caught his eye. He looked at me, then looked away. He didn't stop me. I made my way toward the rear exit, through a narrow hallway lined with coat racks and catering bins, the kind of corridor no one notices unless they work in one. My shoes clicked against the tile, steady and slow, echoing like I belonged to another rhythm entirely, one that didn't depend on seating charts or family scripts. I wasn't headed for drama. I wasn't planning a scene. I was simply leaving, or so I thought. "Ma'am?" a man called from behind. I turned. A catering manager in a black vest, headset tucked into one ear, was motioning at me. "Please stay behind the service line. This area's restricted." I blinked. "I'm not staff." He paused, studied me. I didn't have a badge, no wristband, no guest ribbon like Vera had handed out to half the county. I just had my dress, my clutch, and apparently the look of someone who didn't belong anywhere. His voice softened. "Sorry, we've had issues with guests wandering back here." I nodded. "Right, no problem." I kept walking, the sting settling somewhere in my ribs. Not family, not staff, not even worthy of hallway clearance. They stripped me of every visible tie, I thought. All that's left is silence. The next turn brought me face to face with Vera. She appeared like she always did. Lipstick perfect, shoulders square, not a strand of hair out of place. Champagne still in hand, the glass untouched. Her eyes held that familiar blend of pity and calculation. "Hey," she said, "if it's all feeling like too much, maybe you should head out." She said it like she was offering kindness, like the problem was mine to manage, not theirs to stop causing. I stared at her. "You know how you get," she added, voice dipped in sugar. "And this is Mom and Dad's night." I could have laughed, could have screamed. Instead, I leaned in slightly, let my voice lower. "Every night is your night, Vera. You just renamed this one." Her mouth twitched. She didn't like that. But she didn't answer either. Clarice appeared seconds later, her presence like a perfume you remember, even when no one's wearing it. She joined us with a slow, unreadable smile, eyes darting between us. "What's going on?" she asked. Vera tilted her head. "We were just talking." Clarice's tone didn't change, but her shoulders did, settling into that familiar defensive posture. "Let's not turn this into something it's not." My reply came easy. Too easy. "It already is," I said. "You just don't want to look at it." She blinked, caught off guard, and for once didn't have a counter. Not one of her usual lines. Not even a, "Let's talk later." I turned toward the side door, the one used by vendors and staff, not guests. Not family. It didn't matter. That was the door I'd earned. As I reached for the handle, I looked back once. Vera and Clarice were still standing there. One holding a glass she didn't drink. The other holding a truth she didn't want. Neither of them followed. I stepped outside into the night air. Cool, sharp, free. They thought I walked out to avoid drama. They never imagined I walked out to deliver it. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming steadily against the roof of my car as I sat behind the wheel. Engine off. Headlights dimmed. The windshield wipers moved once, then stilled, as if even the car knew I wasn't going anywhere just yet. I watched the venue from a distance. From here, the party looked like a fairy tale. Soft lights glowing through fogged windows, silhouettes laughing and dancing like nothing had happened, like I'd never existed at all. But they knew. They would know soon enough. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up a damp envelope. Inside it was my invitation, folded, stained, and curling at the edges from where I'd held it too long. Before I left, I had walked right up to Vera's place at the head table and placed it there. Right on her plate. My name still visible, though the ink had bled through. You forgot me in every photo. You missed me on every list. You replaced me in your narrative. But this little card, was proof I had been there. A quiet announcement. I saw everything. And I remember. The phone buzzed once. Maeve. I answered on the first ring. "They've been served," she said, voice clean and clinical. "Clarice, Vera, Norman. Full email trail. They'll have it in their inboxes within the hour." I let the silence stretch between us, the only sound the hum of the rain. "You okay?" she asked. I closed my eyes. "Yes. Just needed it to be real?" "It is." I nodded to no one. "Thanks, Maeve, for doing it clean." "That's what you pay me for," she said. Then, after a pause, "And also because I like you." I smiled. A real one this time. Not for show. When the call ended, I set the phone back down and opened my laptop. I didn't check social media. I didn't open email. I pulled up the old PDF my grandfather left. His final amendment to the trust. I scrolled to the signature page and stared at his name. Edgar Hathaway. Sharp, slanted, unshakable. He'd given me power, not because I'd asked for it, but because I hadn't asked for anything else. Maeve's voice echoed in my mind. "Your grandfather didn't trust anyone else. You're the only one he left authority to." And now they'd feel it. Not a threat, not revenge, just truth, finally with teeth. The family group chat began to light up on my phone. Missed calls, question marks, messages from numbers I hadn't saved in years. "Tamsin, what's going on? Is this real? You're listed as the sole trustee. Why would Edgar do that? Why didn't anyone tell me? Call me." I didn't respond. Not yet. I just watched the screen light up and fade again, as predictable as fireworks after the 4th of July. Loud, fast, and over too quickly. I wasn't going to argue with people who had removed me from every birthday slideshow. I wasn't going to explain my place in a family that had spent years erasing it. They'd always had control of the rooms, the tables, the stories. But they forgot one thing. Paper remembers. And I had the paper now. I didn't drive home. Instead, I pulled out of the lot, windshield clearing with each swipe, and headed downtown toward Maeve's office. She was still working late, and we had details to finalize. This wasn't about getting even. This was about getting free. By the time I got home, the rain had soaked through every layer I had. My coat hung limp on the back of the door, puddling at the hem. I didn't turn on the lights. I just walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stood there with the door wide open, letting the chill settle me. My phone buzzed once. Then again. I knew who it would be before I even looked. Clarice. Voicemail. I let it roll into transcription before I pressed play. Her voice crackled through the speaker, soft and shaky. "Tamsin, please. This is getting out of hand. We didn't know. We never meant for any of this. I don't understand why you'd do something like this. Can we please just talk? Her breath caught. There it was, that little hitch in her voice. Almost like guilt, but not quite. No apology, no ownership, just desperation that something was out of her control for once. I watched the screen go dark in my hand and set the phone down on the counter. The weight of her message didn't land where she thought it would. It didn't feel like a mother trying to make things right. It felt like a CEO trying to stop a leak. If you're crying because you lost control, I whispered to the silence, don't call it heartbreak. I made coffee, not because I needed it, but because the routine mattered. Something about boiling water and grinding beans helped settle my chest more than any forced conversation ever had. The sun was just beginning to filter through the blinds when my inbox chimed. One new message. Subject: I remember you. From James, CarterCateringSolutions.com. I stared at it for a second before opening. Tamsin, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I was one of the servers at your family's event last night. I know you probably don't remember me, but I've worked a few of your family's functions over the years. I just wanted to say, I remember you. You're the one who planned your father's 60th, right? I still remember how smooth that night ran. You were the one coordinating the band and the cake, and even fixing the seating mess last minute. Everyone credited Vera, but we all saw who was actually doing the work. Last night, I saw you out in the rain. I saw your name wasn't on the seating chart. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how to interrupt all that noise. Anyway, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know, not everyone forgot you. James. I read the message twice, then a third time, and for a moment, I just let myself sit with it. A stranger remembered what my own mother pretended not to. A server who carried empty glasses saw more than half my family had. It wasn't validation, exactly. It was something quieter, softer, proof that I hadn't imagined it all. I closed the laptop, picked up my phone again, and opened the family group thread, the one that had remained suspiciously quiet since Maeve's email went out. I scrolled past old messages, birthday gifts no one sent me, vacation photos I was never invited to, prayer hands for Vera's flu. I stared at the blank message box, thought about typing something, then didn't. Instead, I pressed and held the thread. The delete conversation button popped up. I tapped it, and it was gone. I opened a new message window and typed to Maeve. Let them respond through lawyers now. She replied within a minute. Already started. I set my phone face down and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't bitterness. This was the beginning of peace. The sun was starting to dip when the next ping came. Not a phone call this time, just a new email. From Maeve. Subject: Meeting recap, delivered as requested. I clicked it open while seated on my couch, legs tucked under me, still wearing the sweatshirt I'd slept in. The apartment was quiet. No music, no TV, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of life continuing outside. They called an emergency family meeting this afternoon. I attended on your behalf. Your statement was read at the beginning and left on the table afterward. Beneath that line, a quote I'd typed last night in a window lit only by the glow of street lamps. Sometimes, to be seen, you have to disappear. And sometimes, disappearing is the only way to make noise. I debated signing it, but in the end, I didn't. They knew who it came from. My laptop buzzed again. This time, a forwarded link from my cousin Elise. Thought you should see this, the message read. I clicked. It was a video clip, blurry, phone shot, uploaded to Vera's social media. Norman stood at the front of a room, holding a champagne flute. His tie was slightly askew, and he smiled in that rehearsed way men do when they've been convinced they're the head of something they haven't led in years. I just want to say, he began, how grateful I am for everyone who made this night possible. My wonderful wife, Clarice, our daughter Vera, her incredible husband, the grandkids, and every friend who's stood with us through 4 decades. Pause. Clink. Smiles all around. My name never came, Not a stumble, not a correction, just absence. I closed the video. Of course, I whispered. He wasn't lying, not really. He was thanking the people who had stood beside him. I'd spent most of my life standing behind him. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Vera's post, and wasn't surprised to see it already gathering comments. Where's Tamsin? Thought she was family too. Why's she not tagged in any pics? Didn't she plan their 60th anniversary party a few years ago? It was subtle, but there. A soft ripple in the digital surface they'd tried to keep still. I didn't reply. I didn't react. But I smiled. Not because I felt vindicated, because for the first time, the silence was loud enough for others to hear. It wasn't my voice they noticed. It was my absence. I glanced again at the email from Maeve, rereading the line about the statement being left on the table. I could picture it now. White paper, black ink, sitting quietly as they fumbled to reclaim control of a narrative they thought they owned. They'd built this family like a press release, tight, glossy, surface deep. But cracks had formed. And I hadn't screamed to create them. I'd just stepped out of the frame. Let the silence do the rest. The morning light crept in through the edges of the blinds, casting long strips across the floor like a quiet apology for everything the night didn't fix. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not from sadness, but from stillness. The kind that comes after a decision has already done its damage and left no room for second-guessing. I rose eventually and moved through the apartment without turning on the news or checking the weather. I didn't need to know the temperature to understand the shift had already happened. At the bottom of a drawer I rarely opened sat a cedarwood box. Smooth edges, slightly faded finish. It smelled like the last hug I remembered from my grandfather. I hadn't touched it since the day we buried him. Inside was the envelope. Handwritten, slanted in the way his hands always shook toward the end. Tamsin, if you're reading this, then you already know they'll come for what they believe is owed to them. Let them. What's yours? They've never been able to recognize anyway. You were always the quiet one. That's why I trusted you to hold the truth. The ones who make the least noise usually know the most about structure. And you? You're structure, girl. You're the reason the walls haven't caved in yet. I didn't give you this responsibility to punish you. I gave it to you because you wouldn't use it as a sword, but as a door. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, reading that letter again and again. Not for clarity, he had always been clear, but because it felt like the first time in years someone saw me without squinting. My phone buzzed against the nightstand. A message. Vera, you got what you wanted. Happy? I didn't open the thread. I didn't respond. I pressed and held. Deleted. Not in anger, not even in finality, just in release. The name didn't carry weight anymore, and her words couldn't follow me where I was going. I turned on the kettle, poured myself tea, and opened my email. Among the usual newsletters and noise was a subject line that made me pause. Invitation to join our board. Seattle Family Resource Collaborative, I clicked. It was from an organization I'd volunteered with anonymously 2 years ago, back when I still thought giving meant being accepted. The email was simple, direct. Tamsin, your contributions didn't go unnoticed. Your quiet leadership inspired our team, and we'd be honored to have you join our board as we expand our work across the state. I leaned back in my chair, steam from the tea curling up beside me. It wasn't a spotlight, it wasn't a stage, but it was mine. I hit reply. Thank you, I'd be honored. Then I closed the laptop and stared out the window, where the sky was already changing color, more slate than silver, but still soft. I hadn't left my family. I'd arrived somewhere else. The community center buzzed with the kind of energy that doesn't need to be loud to feel alive. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, hands clasped in warm greetings, casseroles passed from one table to another, like offerings in a shared ritual. These weren't the kind of people who posed for photo ops or needed name cards. They just showed up and stayed. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. Some I knew from volunteering shifts, others from neighborhood events or late-night emergency calls when the shelter needed extra hands. No one asked me to prove my place here. A woman in a denim jacket stopped beside me, clutching a pie. "Is your family coming?" I smiled. Not with bitterness, but with certainty. "Everyone who's supposed to be is already in this room." She nodded, not realizing what the answer held. Behind me, the tables were dressed in soft linens, scattered with printed stories of local mothers and caregivers, small testimonials, faces often overlooked. Today wasn't about me, and somehow that made it entirely mine. After helping a volunteer rearrange the donation basket, I stepped outside for a moment of air. The sun had finally broken through, casting slanted gold across the sidewalk. I took a breath and opened my purse. Inside, at the bottom, was a cream-colored envelope addressed in my own handwriting. Clarice. The flap wasn't sealed. I'd written it 3 days ago, unsure what I was hoping for. Inside was a blank card, thick cardstock, no message. Just the weight of everything I could have said. I pulled it out and leaned against the railing, letting the breeze flip it open. Then, with a borrowed pen from the sign-in table, I wrote a single line. "If I wasn't welcome in your house, you're not welcome in my peace." I folded it back into the envelope, paused, then tore it clean in half. Not out of spite, out of finality. I dropped the pieces into the trash and stepped back inside. The event was already underway. Someone tapped a mic at the front of the room, and I made my way toward the podium. A few people clapped quietly, unsure if we were officially starting. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need one. "Thank you all for being here," I said, steady. This started as an idea, just a seed, and it grew because people showed up, even when it was uncomfortable, especially then. A few heads nodded, others smiled. Not performative, genuine. "Sometimes," I continued, "you don't lose a family, you just stop letting them lose you." The room held still for a moment. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, but rooted. Afterward, I walked among the tables, pouring coffee, asking about grandkids, listening to worries that had nothing to do with inheritance or appearances. It was messy and real and perfect. That night, when I got home, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. No calls came. No messages followed. And that was the point. You don't have to be welcomed back where you were never wanted, when you've built something no one can shut you out of.